Um, there we go. We're going to capture this so it's available to you folks and those who didn't get here. So we have with us this morning, as I mentioned before, he used to be a local boy. Now he's a local man. Now he's a local Ramananda John Welshons with us today, and he's here to do our talk. So he's been with us before. Many of you have heard him speak, and many of you have done the meditations that he did at our center. But for those of you who don't, let me just tell you that a little bit about him. It's just really exciting to have him here because he really is a highly respected contemporary spiritual teacher who lives in northern New Jersey, right near us, which is beautiful. His teachings they just masterfully weave together wisdom from the world's greatest mystical contemplative traditions. And he's practiced this Vipassana, okay, you can tell him that later, John. Vipassana meditation and various forms of yoga for more than 50 years and traveled and studied extensively in India. He also worked for many years with spiritual luminaries Ram Dass and Stephen Levine, and he's also trained with Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. He holds a BA in Comparative Religions from the University of South Florida and an MA in History of Religions from Florida State University. He is the author of 3 critically acclaimed books: One Soul, One Love, One Heart, The Sacred Path to Healing All Relationships, When Prayers Aren't Answered, Opening the Heart and Quieting the Mind in Challenging Times, and Awakening from Grief, Finding the Way Back to Joy. That is a topic, John, that we discussed this morning in our group, grief. So there was a lot of discussion about there's so many different levels of grief that we're going through now as a culture and individually and all. So please, we're all set to welcome John Welshons.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So good to be with the Center for Spiritual Living of North Jersey. A lot of old friends here this morning and a lot of new friends. So wonderful to be with all of you. I'm just going to read you a quick statement from, we were doing a meditation before we began this morning, which was so beautifully led by Neil. And it struck me that our practices are very interesting in the sense that we incorporate meditation, contemplation, treatments, prayer, inner work of various kinds. And we go into these deep sacred spaces inside, and then we come back out into the world, which sometimes seems crazy. So this is a beautiful statement I came across recently from my dear friend Ram Dass. Can you imagine when you become that place you've only touched through your meditations? When you are love, you finally acknowledged who you really are. You've cleared away all of the mind trips that kept you being who you thought you were. Now, everybody you look at, you're in love with. You experience the exquisiteness of being in love with everybody and not having to do anything about it. He's reminding me, Ram Dass used to talk about this in lectures, and he would say, you know, what happens sometimes is when we do our spiritual practices and they start to work and we go into these very pure spaces of love and bliss and, oh, it's so good. And you start to have this experience where you look into other people's eyes and you see, oh my goodness, you know, and suddenly you feel like someone you've just met, you've never been so in love in your life as you are with this person. And it's just wonderful. And then the next time, you know, you're in the line at the grocery store and you look in the cashier's eyes and the same thing happens. Well, it can get very complicated, because if you are in a living out the model that a lot of us live out, which we might refer to as a deprivation model, which means, we're living in a sense of not having enough, or not being enough, or not knowing enough, or not doing enough. It's not enoughness. So whenever you have that experience with another human being, it's, I need to take them home. I need to keep them. So when Ramdas says, when you have that experience and you don't have to do anything about it, that's true spiritual freedom. Now, to apply that to what I wanted to talk about this morning, there's so much going on in our world, so much. And it's always been a challenge to live into the teaching that we're all one, and to love everyone. Because the mind is constantly saying, how do I love that person? I can love this person, but I don't think I can love that person. And I think we get a little confused about what it means. When I'm working with meditation, and as Neil just mentioned, grief, a lot of grief is about holding on to resentment. The Buddha said, this wonderful image, that getting angry and holding on to resentment is like reaching into a red hot flaming fire and picking up a red hot burning charcoal in your bare palm with the intention of throwing it at someone. But who gets burned? And then, as you know, I love Pema Chodron, and she updated the Buddha's teaching on anger, and she said, getting angry and hanging on to resentment is like eating rat poison and then expecting the rat to die. And it's very interesting to take a look at what it is we feel when we go into meditation, when we repeated the affirmation for today: I am the essence of pure beauty, power, and love. Wherever I go, I bring this essence in my steps and my breath. And then to explore the moments in life when you don't feel like the essence of love. We all have them. And what changes, what shifts? Something in our mind. Because our teachings tell us that love that we seek and so love to experience is always inside us. It's who we truly are. And that love suggests that everything is as it should be. Now, when we say everything is as it should be, or it's all in divine order, or it's all good, or all these different expressions that we have for trying to remind ourselves that everything is okay, that doesn't mean that there isn't suffering in life. And it doesn't mean that there isn't cruelty and unkindness and dishonesty on this planet, because there's plenty of that. Now, how do we reconcile the fact that our teachings tell us everything is in divine order, everything is perfect, and yet we look at the world and we see all of this other stuff? Well, maybe it's to say it isn't other. If you look at suffering, you look at the suffering in your own life, ask yourself what its function has been. So here's another statement from Ramdas. If you look back at the suffering in your own life, each time you would have avoided it if you possibly could have. And yet, when you look at the depth of your character now, isn't part of that a product of those experiences of suffering? Weren't those experiences part of what created the depth of your inner being? Neil was mentioning that my old high school friend Barbara Ashworth is with us this morning. And, it's interesting because when I think back to high school, I think of it as like the time of the greatest suffering of my life. Because not only early on in high school, I was bullied a lot. I was a small kid and kind of a nerd, and got a lot of bullying, and I was very unhappy. And then on top of that, both my parents were alcoholics, and our home was like a hell realm with fighting and conflict all the time. And I look back on that now, and I realized that that was the groundwork of doing what I do now. It was the training for what I am now. And in a sense, what drove me toward the spiritual journey was all of the suffering I experienced earlier in life. It doesn't mean that the spiritual journey eliminated the suffering, because it's always a balancing act on this plane. So that when we say, how do I learn to love everyone and why should I? That love doesn't necessarily imply that we approve of the things that other human beings do, that we condone unkindness and cruelty and violence. Loving doesn't mean that. I probably told this story to your group in the past, but a number of years ago, I used to teach meditation in prisons. Some of the students had been convicted of murder. And yet they turned out to be, some of them, not all of them by any means, but some of them really good meditation students who really wanted to disburden themselves of the guilt and shame that they felt about what they had done earlier in life. And I looked at this situation and I thought, I go into these institutions and give these people love and kindness. However, I'm not necessarily sure that it isn't good for them and for the society to be in this institution right now where we limit their ability to harm other human beings. So I think there is always a balance between loving and being compassionate and recognizing that your compassion also has to extend to people who are going to possibly be harmed by human beings who, for whatever complex of circumstances in their past, they can't help themselves. They do harm to other human beings. And so where do we find the balance? How do we love somebody who can be dishonest and unkind, sometimes even violent, and yet do what we can to restrain them from being dishonest, unkind, and violent? That is compassion for everyone. Understanding the karmic predicament, if you will, that certain people are caught in, understanding our own karmic predicament, and not allowing unkindness, cruelty, and dishonesty to flourish on this planet. So loving is really confronting that and inviting it to stop. Now, there's also recognizing that if we say who we truly are is infinite, unconditional love, and that when we feel that, the reason it feels so good is because it's coming home. It's coming into who we truly are. It's awakening to our true nature and wanting to share that with the world. So it's really like beginning to treat the entire planet as our family and everyone on it as our family. Most of us in our family have people who are difficult. Sometimes they would probably suggest that even we are difficult. But what we do on the path of love is whatever we can to spread more love. So don't ever confuse love and forgiveness with condoning unkindness, cruelty, and dishonesty. And we do what we do to spread love in the world and to reduce the amount of unkindness and cruelty. Yesterday, a dear friend of mine, Frank Ostaseski, who's a wonderful teacher based in San Francisco, who came up through the Zen tradition. He was a student of Suzuki Roshi. Suzuki Roshi wrote Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And Frank shared this wonderful statement from a very wonderful historian named Howard Zinn, historian, philosopher, died a couple of years ago. Howard Zinn said, how to be hopeful in bad times. To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places, and there are so many, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And if we do act in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents. And to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. In other words, as Gandhi said, to be the change we wish to see in the world, to be the change we wish to see in the world, to do what we can to bring more love, more kindness, more generosity into the world, in spite of the fact that sometimes people are returning to us unkindness, cruelty, and acts that, and words that seem unloving. So the challenge is to stay rooted in your own heart, in the heart of compassion and love, no matter what's going on around you. How do you do that? Well, as Howard suggests, one of the ways is to observe and study the acts and words of the people who are inspirational in this regard. You know, for me, I think my two greatest heroes have been Mahatma Gandhi and Dr. Martin Luther King. Two people who really showed how to be loving no matter what, how to be loving when you're surrounded by cruelty and unkindness. That's real love. And, you know, when I was writing my book, One Soul, One Love, One Heart, the subtitle was The Sacred Path to Healing All Relationships. I recognized that ultimately the whole book boiled down to one principle, and that is that our problems in relationships, our problems with other human beings, are that rooted in the fact that we want them to be different than they are. And as all things stand right now, the truth of the matter is they are the way God made them. They are the way the universe created them. Now, a lot of forces went into creating them that way, but I would invite you to stretch your minds and begin to live on different planes of consciousness so that you can ultimately, when you go into meditation and prayer and you look to awaken the love within you, that in that place you can feel the perfection of everything. That is not to say that it's all good. I have a problem with that statement because there's an awful lot that happens on this planet that were we to say to the person to whom it's happening, hey, this is all good, baby, it's not a very kind thing to say many, many times. You could say it's all good, taking a step back and saying, if everything on this planet leads us closer and closer to unconditional love, if that's where we're going through all of this chaos and suffering, that ultimately we're going toward unconditional love, well, then I guess it's all good. But along the way, there's a lot of pain and suffering, and we have to be sympathetic and empathetic toward ourselves and toward everyone we know who's experiencing suffering. So there's that level where my guru used to say, can't you see it's all perfect? And we would say, no, we can't see it's all perfect. To the place where we understand that we are facing some tremendous challenges on this planet right now and really all the time. And experiences that, though they may be perfect at some high level of consciousness, don't feel very perfect at the time people are going through them. That's where we really expand the heart of love and compassion. And how do we live in that heart and do everything we can to both see the world as perfect as it is and do everything we can to make it better? That's really the challenge, to me, of spiritual life. So I want to invite you to join me now in a few moments of silent meditation. I'll do a little guidance, but I invite you to sit up straight and close your eyes and come into the heart of love and compassion. Come into that place of pureness. See if you can connect with that subtle essence of infinite, unconditional love that exists always within you. Breathe in and out of your heart as if there's a beautiful opening in the center of your chest and the air can come directly into your heart. And see that air being transformed into pure white light. The pure white light of love, peace, healing, and joy. And as you breathe that into your heart, feel it connect with the place of pure love, peace, healing, and joy within you. And then send that light of love, peace, healing, and joy back out into the world. Breathing in the light of love, awakening the light of love within you, sending the light of love back out into the world. So that even as you speak out against unconsciousness and cruelty, you are resting in love. Let your words and actions in this world come from this sacred space within you. And one last thing I'll offer you. This in, I would say, the last 10 years of Ram Dass's life on earth became his favorite mantra. The mantra is, I am loving awareness. I am loving awareness. I am loving awareness.